Welcome to today's webinar. So my name is Maris. I'm the Director of Player Sustainability at LeoVegas. It's a really pleasure today to be moderating this session as part of the 2025 European Safer Gambling Week, which is now in full swing in its second day. So this week is all about sharing knowledge, promoting collaboration, and advancing safer gambling practices across Europe. We have several graphics across different languages, and we are doing our best to promote as much as possible safer gambling and initiatives around this topic. Now, today's topic is quite a hot topic, to be fair. It's around responsible advertising and marketing, which is quite crucial when it comes to communication with consumers, as it has a direct impact on public trust and player protection. And we need to ensure that marketing is both engaging and responsible, which is quite essential for the sustainability of the gambling sector. Now, in this session, we'll be exploring industry-leading practices in responsible gambling advertising. We'll look at how key organizations are driving this forward. And for that, we have the European Gaming and Betting Association, the EGBA, and the European Advertising Standards Alliance, EASA, who have been working together to strengthen these responsibility standards and to promote as much as possible safer gambling messages across Europe. So I'm quite delighted to have two excellent speakers today with me. So we have Vasiliki, who's the Senior Manager of EU Affairs at EGBA. And we also have Tudor Manda, who is the Self-Regulation Development Manager and Deputy Head of Office at the European Advertising Standards Alliance. So today, together, they'll share insights into the development of EGBA's Responsible Advertising Code and Influencer Pledge Framework, and how EASA's work on advertising self-regulation contributes to more responsible marketing practices across the sectors. So here's how the session will run. We'll begin with a presentation from EASA, and then it's followed by a presentation from EGBA, and then we'll open the floor to a discussion and some Q&As. So thank you everyone for joining. And with that, I will hand over to Tudor with a question to start off with, if that's okay, Tudor. So before we dive into the details and your presentation, can you give us a brief overview of EASA? So what do you do and what's your role in coordinating advertising standards across Europe?
Thanks, Marisa. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. What EASA does, EASA was set up back in 1992 to ensure that consumers had redress for the complaints that they were lodging against advertising that circulated across member states within the single market. As the European Commission was building the European Union and the economic single market, it was really crucial for them to ensure that even when an ad was going across the internal market boundaries, that consumers had the same redress if they were complaining within their own country. And so they set up, or they helped set up the European Ad Standards Alliance that then created what is now called the cross-border complaints system. And we now have an automated platform that exchanges complaints from one country to another to make sure that consumers have that redress. That was the initial core. From there, we've expanded. We now have industry representatives as well to learn from marketing, new marketing trends. What are the business requirements? What are the new trends in marketing? And at the same time, we also are working to further the frontiers of what it means to be responsible in the field of advertising and marketing communications. And we do this through a wide array of different solutions, different levers, different developments, and I'll go in detail to that. Another key point that's really core to EASA is to make sure that there's a harmonized approach to responsible advertising across the single market. Actually, not just within the single market in the EU, but we also have members outside of the EU. But to ensure that there's the SR rules and advertising standards are enforced in a harmonious manner across all European countries. That's the blurb in a couple of sentences, basically.
Thank you for that. And maybe moving over to Vasiliki. So EGBA and EASA have worked together on quite a few projects. Can you just give us a summary of this collaboration? Like what self-regulatory projects have you developed together? Why does the self-regulatory approach actually work? And how does it complement regulation then?
Yes, thank you, Maris. It's actually very important for us that we have collaborated with the EASA, and we had the chance to collaborate with the self-regulatory organizations of several member states in the EU. The goal was to enhance responsibility around gambling marketing, because gambling marketing is not just any marketing. Gambling has risks, and gambling marketing needs to be responsible. It needs to be there to inform the player where they can play safely, but it has to follow certain standards. So we wanted to enhance responsibility standards around gambling advertising, and we started working on a responsible code of conduct, which was published first in 2020. This code of conduct included some rules on content moderation, first of all, so how the gambling ad should look like or should not look like in order to be responsible. But we also included for the first time rules on social media to protect minors, rules around the inclusion of responsible gambling messages, and rules on sponsorship. So it's a very comprehensive tool on how to make a gambling ad responsible. Members of EGBA have committed to frequently monitor the code because self-regulation without monitoring has no worth. Monitoring is so crucial for compliance. And we conducted two exercises together with EASA again. One was, I think, 3 years ago. It covered the entirety of the code. And the last one was this year or last year, and included focused only on minor protection. And following the development of the code, we agreed also and we published a pledge on influencer marketing to increase transparency and to increase minor protection. And right now we are also in discussions in order to develop guidelines, so we will be able to facilitate gambling operators when they want to implement social media provisions of the EGBA Code of Conduct. I will further elaborate on that in a bit.
Thank you. That's a great foundation actually to start on why self-regulation matters and how you guys are working together. Now I think it's time to maybe dive a bit deeper into the broader landscape of responsible advertising. So Tudor, over to you to share EASA's insights.
Thanks, Maris. Yeah, talking a little bit about what EASA does in a bit more detail and how our work, what our work around promoting responsible advertising is, and the idea of collective self-regulation. Basically, what EASA and all our members are doing is to ensure to build and to foster trust, consumer trust, policymakers trust, businesses trust, competitor trust as well, to drive that trust through the idea of communicating responsibly. And this goes through the promotion of responsible advertising. What I'll do first is maybe take a step back and talk a little bit why trust is important. And on the next slide, it's really important to keep this in mind, I think, because it's the foundation of why all of this matters. If there's anything that anyone remembers from my presentation, it will be this, right? Trust in advertising is not a luxury. It's your license to operate. With new technology coming up, we've seen over the past decade, right? Influencer marketing is on the rise. A lot of new brands are experimenting with it. There's AI as well that's changing ad land as we speak with Gen AI, advertising seemingly changing the landscape. It's upending the way brands, businesses are promoting their products and services. And another important backdrop is that consumers have high expectations with the rise in online advertising, which, by the way, is at about 120 billion euro digital ad spend in 2024. Consumers have higher expectations than ever. they are seeing a lot more advertising online, and they're seeing a lot of more diverse ways of advertising, whether through influencer marketing, whether through social media, whether through their marketer-owned websites, whether through direct marketing, through email marketing, and so on. There's many diverse ways. So consumers they're shown a lot of diverse ways of promoting different services, and they have high expectations, and that's normal. And that's why trust is really important, is to make sure that your consumers, the audiences, can trust and believe and get inspired by the ads that they see. The way we foster this trust, the way we build this trust by consumers, is through communicating responsibly. If consumers are inspired, if they trust the ads that they see, then policymakers are more likely to also believe in the system. Brands and competitors are also more likely to trust one another, that, yeah, actually everyone's really on the same level playing field. They all apply the same legislation, the same standards, the same rules. And so we're all playing with the same rules here. And if it creates a trusted and trustworthy ecosystem in industry. Now this is, of course, the ideal system. But communicating responsibly, what does this mean in practice? On the next slide, the way we define responsible advertising is basically advertising that is legal, decent, honest, and truthful. It's a no-brainer. Every ad has to be legal. If an ad falls foul of the law, there will be according sanctions, fines, and so on. And also, that's simply not enough. As I said, consumers expect much more from advertising than simply being legal. And on the other side, for brands and creative agencies as well, for media, there's a need to continue to be creative, to inspire consumers and audiences. And that's where collective self-regulation, I come back to this in a bit, but collective self-regulation, basically in a couple of words, it creates a buffer between the legal red line of the law and providing creative buffer, creative breathing space for brands, for creative agencies to inspire consumers. And this is where the decent, honest, and truthful come in. I'm not going to go into detail what each of these means. It's also sort of a mnemotechnic way of for brands to remember. But basically, decent advertising means that your ads don't harm or offend anyone. Honest means that you don't mislead in any way, that you, even by omission, you're not supposed to forget elements or claims in the ad that might omit certain information, and then the consumer might have done a purchasing decision they would have otherwise not done. Truthful targets different areas of social responsibility, also taste and decency to a certain extent. And on all of this together, really, they create a buffer between what's legally allowed, that's the democratic induced law, and creating a creative buffer for brands to create artistic advertising. You see here on this slide as well a campaign that we ran a couple of years ago for our 30th anniversary for EASA back in 2022. As I mentioned, EASA was set up in 1992, where we really wanted to show that obviously greenwashing is one example of something that's not allowed by definition, by law. But what it means to greenwash, what it means to have an environmental claim that might go against legislation, is not a simple black and white. Sometimes it can go beyond. It can go beyond in terms of sustainability behaviors. It can go in the area of environmental impact that might be implicit in what's in the ad. So this is where our network, our members, are plugged in to ensure that advertising is responsible, advertising is legal, decent, honest, and truthful. This is how we turn this vision of a trusted ecosystem into something that's actually valuable. But who are the people behind all of this mechanism? On the next slide, there's you'll see a whole universe of entities. It's an acronym soup. You'll see on both sides of the slide. First, on the right-hand side are all the industry representatives that are members of EASA. These inform us of, as I mentioned earlier, of the marketing trends, the newest forms of advertising, the sensitive areas that are really important for them. and also their interest areas. They each represent either the advertisers with the WFA, World Federation of Advertisers, agencies such as EACA, the European Association for Communication Agencies, media, we have television, we have the out-of-home, World Out-of-Home Organization, radio, publishers, magazines, even influencer marketing, the European Influencer Marketing Alliance. Lastly, a key component that became obvious in the early 2010s was the rise of social media and the importance to also have the digital players, and starting with the major digital players, to have them plugged into the system so that they can also have their voices heard, and so that we can learn from them, and then they can also drive the work of responsible advertising. And that's why in 2020, Google joined the alliance, and then this year as well, Meta joined as well. This is on the industry side. They inform what business practices, what are the business practices and what their interests are. On the other side are what we call the self-regulatory organizations. These are the standard-bearing organizations for advertising. They set the rules and the standards of what it means to be responsible in almost each European country. We have 28 of them in 26 countries. Some of them have 2, the UK and Germany, for historic reasons. And basically, they all do broadly the same thing, and I'll go into detail in a bit. They all have different nuance, different color to how they operate. And they've all been set up by the local industry to help drive responsible advertising. Some of them are very, very old. For instance, the French SRO ARPP has been around since 1932. Others, most of them were set up in the 1960s. The second wave was in the 1990s, and then a final wave in the early noughties, specifically in Central and Eastern Europe. Our work as well for EASA is also to include more and more European, to have basically the whole of the European map covered as much as possible. We don't just work in a vacuum, of course. Europe is not the only continent in the world. We work with other partners. You see them on the bottom right corner. The most important is the furthest to the right is the ICC. I'll come back to that in a second, but basically the ICC is the International Chamber of Commerce. They set the international standard of what it means to be responsible in advertising. They have a code that they set up back in 1937, and they've done their 11th revision last year. This code is then used as a foundation for each country to build its own code at national level. The other 2 institutions with whom we work closely is the EDA, the European Interactive Digital Advertising Alliance. Whereas EASA works on the content of the ad, what is depicted in it, what are the claims, how are the actors behaving, EDAA focuses on the targeting and the personalization part of advertising, which is just as important. But because the actors in both ecosystems are different, there's a reason why there's 2 associations. Finally, as I mentioned, we work with the International Council of Ad Self-Regulation. They're basically the EASA of the whole wide world. At EASA level, we also do a lot of lobbying with the European Commission, a lot of advocacy work. ICOS does not do that, obviously, but it brings together all of the world SROs from Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, and so on. So these are the people behind the alliance that make up the alliance, that do all of the work basically with us to drive responsible advertising. What SROs do in practice is on the next slide. They can be summarized basically in 5 categories, 5 channels. First, they develop the rules. As I mentioned, the ICC code is the gold standards at international level, at global level. If you will, it's the least common denominator at global level, bringing together 170 something countries. But because it's the least common denominator, especially for Europe, where there's a lot of regulatory frameworks already in place, it sometimes is simply not enough. And that's where SROs come in. They take the ICC codes, they tweak it, they adapt it, they add their own rules at local level, inspired by legal requirements, inspired by business practices. and also by cultural particularities at local level, social realities as well. They develop rules that really take account of the local context and that work for both protecting consumers and driving creative advertising for the benefit of both consumers and businesses. Then they also train industry according to these rules, which, by the way, are also routinely updated about 2 to 3 years, depending on the SRO. But they also train industry, the new stakeholders, the Googles, the Metas of the digital space, but also the new fragmented stakeholders such as influencers, content creators that might not be aware that there are any rules to abide by. And it's really important that we speak their language and adapt the way we train these new stakeholders to their reality. So there's a lot of work in training industry. It's 2 words, but there's a heck of a lot of work that goes into that. Copy advice and pre-clearance are basically the same thing. They are advice given on an ad or an ad campaign before broadcast, before dissemination or publication online. Copy advice, both of them are confidential, given to the brand or the creative agency, sometimes more rarely to the media as well. Copy advice is voluntary, and if the brand is a member of the SRO, usually it's for free. Pre-clearance is mandatory in the sense that the industry has decided, or a specific sector of the industry has decided, all of their ads will be cleared before they are broadcast. Usually this is for TV in France, the UK, and Portugal, to a lesser extent in other European countries. The fourth thing that SROs do is monitoring. As Vasiliki mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work going both at the EASA level, but also on national level with SROs in monitoring ads at scale. They're increasingly using either data-driven technology, either even also AI-driven technology to review and analyze ads, swathes of ad at scale. First, with this technology, but there's always a human review at the end to make sure that that there's a due diligence behind it, and also to have clarity of what are the trends in terms of compliance. This is really key to make sure that the industry is aware of its pitfalls, how it can improve, and have a reality check, basically. At the very end, there's complaints handling. This is sort of the core of what every SRO does. This is the first service that they provide, and then they build all the other services. Complaints handling, most of the complaints that SROs handle can vary from 70 to 90% are lodged by consumers for free, or all complaints lodged by consumers are for free and confidential. In Europe, there's an average of 55,000 complaints lodged with SROs against roughly 33,000 ads every year. 70% of these are lodged in the UK with the EASA, with the Advertising Standards Authority, and half of these complaints take issue with online advertising. And a fifth, 22% of complaints lodged against online advertising, so 22% again, 22% out of 50% are take issue with influencer marketing ads. This is just to give you an idea of how SROs are really at the front line of consumer expectations. They feel what consumers are really caring about, and that feeds into their priorities. Okay, we need to do something about it. Clearly, consumers are complaining a lot about influencer marketing. Again, it depends what they complain about. Usually it's about transparency requirements, that it's not transparent enough that what the content creator has uploaded is a marketing piece and not an editorial piece. But it can also be about the content of the ad. If there's an alcohol product and it's targeting minors, that's really problematic. The last point on complaints handling, SROs also handle competitor complaints, usually against a fee, and also sometimes, but more rarely, interest groups, NGOs, sometimes also regulators' complaints go through SROs. What are some of the rules that the SROs apply? I've already touched upon it briefly, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. And on the next slide, I've put together a sort of a canvas of all the different rules that we work with. As I said, the foundation of everything is, of course, legislation. For EASA, what is most important is the EU legal framework, but for SROs, not just that, there's also the national legislation, which is really important. Some countries have advertising legislations, others have sectoral legislation that indirectly targets marketing communications and advertising. At EU level, there are a couple of ones that we work on most in most details. The Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. There's also the Audiovisual Media Services Directive that regulates the advertising content. And of late, there's also the Digital Services Act, and the Commission is also thinking about other legislations that may impact advertising. For instance, the Digital Fairness Act may take issue with some parts of influencer marketing. And then there's other legislations that may indirectly impact advertising. That's on the legislation side. There's also the ICC code, as I mentioned earlier, set out in 1937, has gone through 11 reviews, but fundamentally the core chapter of the ICC code has remained unchanged since the 1930s. What they've done since then is added sections and chapters to reflect specific sectors, specific issues that are particularly important, such as environmental claims, online advertising, data protection. And they also publish what they call frameworks, which are readings and interpretations of the rules. This code and these frameworks are then used by national SROs to build their own codes, as I mentioned earlier. We have here a list of different codes, the French one, the Hungarian one, and so on. Some go into a lot of detail, quite thick books of rules, and others are quite frugal, but they're all enforced with the same level of to ensure the harmony between different European markets. At the very top, of course, every industry, every sector is free to build its own commitment. I mentioned here a few. Of course, EGBA has its own code, as Vasiliki mentioned, and of late also the one on influencer marketing. There are other ones alongside it. There's the EU pledge for food marketing, limiting exposure to children of unhealthy foods. There's the WFA Planet Pledge. There's the UNESDA pledge for soft drinks in Europe as well. And then there's also global ones at international level. So this is the canvas of what SROs are working with. Obviously, they will only apply their own national SR rules. To a certain extent, they may also apply national legislation. And if relevant, they may also appeal to some industry commitments if that commitment is recognized at national level, or if the brand is has committed at international level to a commitment. In more detail for gambling, I wanted to highlight a few important aspects on the next slide, diving into these. First, of course, targeting, including appealing or referring to minors is illegal. It's not allowed for gambling advertising. Targeting and including minors is a no-brainer. Appealing or referring to minors there's a bit more granularity to it. What it means to be appealing, what it means to be referring to minors is not a clear-cut definition behind it. This is where SROs are really well placed to judge what appealing to minors means within the local context. Some ads might be okay in other countries, whereas once it crosses the border, it might be received differently. So this is why it's important to work with different SROs wherever the brand wants its ad to appear. Another important part, of course, there's the idea that all the general rules apply. That means on misleadingness, if your ad has a misleading claim, there's a no-brainer that will definitely not just be against ad standards, but against legislation. There are rules on social responsibility. There are rules on taste and decency, around nudity, around religious affinities, around local cultural particularities. And then, of course, there are rules related to gambling, local rules. Some countries have specific standards for gambling advertising. Another aspect I wanted to mention is the increased regulatory scrutiny. Less so at EU level, but particularly at national level. We run every 6 months a survey with SROs to check what are the sensitive topics, what are regulators and policymakers discussing most at national level. And when we did it last October, so last month, gambling advertising was the top of the agenda. This is the first time in 6 years since I've been at EASA that gambling topped the agenda. So this just shows that there's a lot of perhaps regulatory scrutiny is not exactly the right wording, but there's a lot of interest in gambling advertising to see is there any need to intervene, and this goes also through, is there a need to work with local SROs from the regulator side, which I'll go back to this in a minute, but legislation often refers to self-regulation and or co-regulation to ensure that advertising is regulated appropriately and that enforcement is up to par. I wanted to take a little bit of time also to talk about influencer marketing. I mentioned it earlier, and on the next slide, I know that a lot of the brands, not particularly in gambling advertising, but just more generally, every brand at a certain point will want to work with influencers and content creators. EASA has, since 2018, a best practice recommendation on influencer marketing. It's public. You can check it on our website. We've reviewed it last year, I believe, to reflect, again, latest marketing definitions and trends. More generally, what we define as influencer marketing is anything that's been compensated by a brand. Brand control can also be a factor that defines influencer marketing, but generally, if a brand has compensated or rewarded a content creator for a piece of content, that is influencer marketing, is a piece of marketing, it's a commercial communication, and it needs to be disclosed and labeled accordingly. The way that needs to be disclosed and labeled may differ from country by country. It's a national matter, it's a national piece of legislation. So that's why we've developed at EASA an app. It's on our website, Disclose Me, that provides an easy, user-friendly, easy way to identify I'm a brand or an influencer and I have a piece of content that needs to be disclosed. What do I need? Which are the hashtags that I need to use? Go and check it out. It's a great tool. The next slide, very briefly, just mentioning, as I mentioned earlier, that legislation supports and encourages co-regulation. A couple of years back, the European Commission for Justice and Consumer Protection reaffirmed that he sees both regulatory and self-regulatory instruments as complementary to each other. And the AVMSD, the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, encourages the use of co-regulation and self-regulation to drive responsible advertising and to ensure that advertising is correct. This is the whole universe that we work in. I didn't want to take too much of your time. I've already taken quite a lot of time. This is all from me. Basically, what we're trying to do is shape the future of responsible advertising together. And you have here the QR code to EASA's website. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at the email address here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of detail and a lot of information. It's really interesting. I think one of the things that I really loved is how there's learnings from other sectors, not just gambling. Do you have any specific examples of responsible advertising approaches, maybe from other industries? What works well across different sectors?
I mentioned a couple of industry commitments, and EGBA has already done this, where they've basically organized themselves into a sectoral organization that's taking its responsibility serious through a code of conduct that they review regularly. EGBA is one of them. The food marketing has done the same. The alcohol marketing sector has done the same. The soft drinks marketing has done the same. So this is something that EGBA is just, it's on the same par level. And looking into influencer marketing is another way of making sure that it's driving responsible advertising for its sector. Another way to make sure that it's on the, that is furthering responsible advertising is to work with local SROs. This is particularly key for brands, less so for European associations. But as a brand, you'll obviously work across multiple markets, and you'll do your own due diligence. Having yourself mark your own homework is good, but is not enough. That's not how collective self-regulation works. We call it self-policing. It's a requirement under law, and it's good that you do it. It's better if there's an independent entity that does it as well, either through monitoring, but you can also go through copy advice before an ad is broadcast. So that I would say is also a key way to be responsible.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the biggest worry is that it's just a tick box compliance. So what, in your opinion, really separates good responsibility messaging compared to just a tick box exercise?
I think the tick box is a first step in terms of compliance to make sure that you do your to-do list. But it's also a more of a social responsibility approach to ensure that throughout the whole creative process, from the start of the creation of the ad campaign until the very end, that the spirit of the advertising standards, also the spirit of the law, are ingrained within every step of the creation of the ad. Again, this also goes through checking with SROs whether the ad campaign is up to par, making sure that you don't just tick boxes, but that you understand the spirit of what it means to be, for instance, not misleading, what it means to be socially responsible, and that there's that it won't be distasteful. SROs can help understand what it means, what these things mean, and ingraining that within your creative process is something that a lot of the bigger brands at the international level are doing really well.
Okay, and just one last question. I have a lot, but I'm just going to ask one last question
Sure.
because we have Vasiliki waiting, of course. Obviously, one of the biggest topics is it's age-restricted products. And online you have access. I mean, younger individuals might have access to this. So what do you think works best in this area? Like, how can we ensure that the advertising appeals to adults rather than attracts minors? Like, is there any external learnings that we can have from like for the gambling industry?
Mhm. I think there's two things at the very least that every gambling brand can and should do. First, there are tools made available by social media brands or by the open RTB system when it's third party through the open internet and it's a display ad. There are tools to ensure that your ad is only targeting as much as possible people of age. I'm not saying the word minors just because in some countries it might be 21, in some countries it might be 18. So to make sure that your ad is targeting only people that are allowed to seeing it. Now, of course, for social media, or even online, there's no guarantee that it will always be the case. But in 99% of the cases, that's the first step. The second step that really helps is to make sure that the ad that you're producing, the ad you're disseminating online and also offline, is as much as possible not appealing to minors or to children. And this is something that we're working closely with, for instance, the food marketing sector, particularly the ones that have products that are unhealthy, and there's a whole definition of what it means to be an unhealthy food product. That the ads for these products are not appealing to children. And there's a blacklist of elements. There's a roadmap to ensure that, well, certain characters, certain color schemes, certain allusions to certain activities or behaviors might be more appealing to minors than they might be appealing to adults. It's a fine line, but having these instruments, these tools, is really helpful, and it's something that the industry builds itself because they know what works well, and they get inspired also by SROs, by international standard bearings of the ICC and other organizations to build this toolkit. It works very well for the other sectors. It's something that gambling brands could also look into.
Thank you so much. It was really valuable to hear, across sector perspectives and what we as industry in gambling can actually learn. I think now it's time for Vasiliki just to look specifically at what EGBA has developed for the gambling sector. So Vasiliki, over to you.
Sure. So I will start with a little bit of information around EGBA maybe as an introduction. So yes, here you can see information about our association. We are a Brussels-based association representing online gambling operators that are licensed and operating across 21 European countries. There is some interesting numbering here concerning our licenses and our operations. And on the bottom of this slide, you can see the membership, the full membership of EGBA, 8 leading online operators and 3 associate members. Next slide, please. So yes, as we both mentioned earlier, our first project was the development of a code of conduct on responsible gambling advertising that was firstly published in 2020. The rules, as I mentioned earlier, include content moderation, sponsorship, minor protection, social media, responsible gambling messaging. We conducted 2 monitoring exercises, and here I would like to mention that the code of conduct actually includes an obligation for EGBA members to check on transparency of influencers. However, given the, let's say, how popular influencer marketing is and how many complaints there are around transparency of influencer marketing, we took the initiative to work on an influencer pledge and take some additional commitments and provide some further guidance in order to enhance transparency and minor protection around influencer marketing. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, so I'll give you some background information. The pledge, as I mentioned, was developed as a result of our own commitment on transparency, but also on the fact that the lack of transparency, specifically for gambling advertising, was mentioned as an issue for consumers in the fitness check that the European Commission conducted on consumer protection. So we wanted to take initiative on that and see what we can do to enhance transparency. So EGBA members took some additional commitment on that, but on top of that, we also wanted to provide some rules and guidance on how to better age-gate social media, how to content moderate so that a gambling ad, as we mentioned earlier, does not appeal to minors. I will provide some examples for that a bit later. Next slide. So the pledge, the scope of the pledge actually applies to all forms of influencer content, meaning live streams, stories, posts, videos, and any digital content formats. The basis for the pledge, I mean, we didn't come up with our own heads for that. We based the pledge on, as Tudor mentioned, the ICC code on advertising and marketing communications. We based the pledge on existing national advertising self-regulatory codes that were developed by the self-regulatory organizations of member states. And of course, the EGBA code of conduct that already includes some relevant provisions. The pledge was organized in 3 pillars. The first pillar is about enhanced advertising standards on content moderation and age-gating. The second pillar includes some commitments on influencer selection. And finally, of course, monitoring and compliance guidance in order to ensure the effective application of this piece of self-regulation. And the pledge applies to all EGBA members, operators, and their marketing activities in Europe. Next slide, please. So the first pillar is about enhanced standards on content moderation and age-gating. So the pledge is actually providing some guidelines and guidance for influencers in order to make sure that every ad is transparent. For example, by including the hashtag ad signal on it. And we do that by encouraging operators to educate influencers on the use of the disclosure tool, the EASA tool that Tudor mentioned earlier. which provides specific information on which transparency obligations apply to every member state. Further, with regards to age gating, we understand that there is not always very clear indications on how you can age gate an ad on social media. So for this reason, the pledge includes some information on how age gating can be applied, for example, by specific tools that they are provided by platforms like Instagram, YouTube, and so on. And finally, when it comes to the protection of minors and the appealing of the gambling ad to minors, that should not occur. This will be safeguarded first and foremost by the commitment to not include any minor in the gambling ad, but also specific rules on the design of the ad, like, for example, prohibition to include minors, prohibition to include school personnel, prohibition to include any behavior that might be perceived as juvenile, not using any material or objects that can appeal to minors, and so on. We have specific examples on what should not be there. Next slide, please. The second chapter of the pledge concerns how gambling operators should choose the influencers they work with. For example, we encourage the selection of influencers that have been previously screened for their content, if it's responsible or not, and the commitment to not feature marketing posts that would breach any advertising standard or law. In simple words, check your influencer for a previous behavior, let's say. We encourage the education of influencers concerning the latest applicable legal and self-regulatory frameworks. Obviously, influencer marketing is a very rapidly evolving area in advertising, so influencers and the brands they work with need to be on top of the developments. And to this end, there are specific training programs that have been developed on national level that allow these brands and individuals to be on top of the developments and know better what they can or cannot do. Next slide, please. And finally, monitoring and compliance. As I said earlier, we take very seriously the commitment to monitor how well or how bad we perform when it comes to the applications of all these self-regulatory provisions. It's very important to do so because it helps us check how compliant we are, but most importantly, it helps us to be in a constant communication with the authorities and to receive actual feedback on how we can get better. So we have better learnings around responsibility in gambling advertising. For this reason, we have some provisions in the pledge. For example, we encourage the potential pre-clearance by operators. This can be done by the copy advice, as Tudor mentioned earlier. Again, we commit to frequent monitoring. We commit to take down the ads that are found incompatible. And we finally encourage a constant communication with influencers in order to enhance awareness and communication, and this is part of our general, I would say, commitment to promote a high level of consumer protection and minor protection when it comes to online gambling marketing content. Something that I forgot to mention previously with regards to age gating is that EGBA members also commit to when it's possible to check the audience of the influencers, the demographics, and this is very important because we want to ensure that the main audience of the influencers that they work with is not minors. And next slide. Yeah, that concludes my presentation. I try to be efficient and not take much time. You can always mail me for any questions.
Thank you, Vasiliki. I have questions as always. So I think my first question would be, like, as an operator, as EGBA members, what can you walk us through what it means to implement this influencer pledge? So what does it look like in practice?
I think this pledge is, first of all, a practical guide on what exists already in terms of self-regulation and transparency on influencer marketing, but it's also a guide on how to better work with influencers, right? How to enhance the communication, how to better select influencers, how to check their audiences, how to be sure that they are aware how to educate. Further examples of better compliance when it comes to ensuring that an ad is not appealing. And further, I would say commitment to constant dialogue and awareness raising and education. So it's a tool that provides a lot of guidance on how to do things better, and an overall tool to enhance better collaboration with influencers in order to focus on transparency and minor protection.
That's really good. But obviously, this is a pledge. How do you ensure or monitor compliance with the code and the pledge? So what happens if the standards aren't met?
So it's part of a commitment on self-regulation to monitor frequently. So we assign this work to EASA and the SROs. If an ad is found as incompatible, EGBA members commit to take it down, or we can also have discussions around how to change it, how to improve if there is something that needs to be adjusted. But here I also want to mention that I want to bring an example. So in our last monitoring exercise, we checked how EGBA members perform when it comes to the inclusion of responsible gambling messages in television and social media ads. And this was found to be sometimes challenging because of space reasons, for example, because it's not always so easy to include an RG message on an Instagram post or an Instagram bio or a social media advertising material. So for this reason, following the monitoring exercise, we had a very dedicated discussion on that with the SROs on how to better improve. And we took the commitment to develop guidelines, again, together with EASA, specific guidelines that will help us practically implement the inclusion of RG messages in social media. So there is an ongoing commitment and ongoing ideas, new ideas on how to constantly improve and make sure that responsibility is always guaranteed when it comes to gambling advertising.
Thank you. One last question, because we're running out of time. So from your perspective, what do you think are the most common pitfalls of mistakes we see in the gambling advertising?
Overall, I would say that there is, which word should I use? There is this prejudice around gambling advertising and stigma maybe, or gambling advertising is very strictly faced, okay? And yes, as I said earlier, gambling should not be advertised as other sectors. We should be responsible, and it should always contain responsible messages, and specific rules should apply so that minors are protected and that we do not convey wrong messages. But it should be there because the players have the right to know where they can gamble safely and which websites are, legitimate and regulated. Now, when it comes to pitfalls by the gambling industry, I think the most risky field is the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that it's something that it constantly evolves. New trends are coming. We had influencers. Now AI is coming up. So brands should always be on top of these developments, and self-regulation exists for that purpose, so that it complements regulation and it allows industries to take further steps to enhance responsibility and still be able to convey the right message.
Thank you both. It's been really interesting. I wish the webinar could be longer, but we have an hour. I think I'm just gonna put one question, and if you can be very brief, and then we can conclude. So, I mean, Tudor from your monitoring work, Vasiliki from the self-regulation work. In short, what are your key recommendations for gambling operators, but who genuinely want to advertise responsibly, not just to be compliant? Do you want to start, Tudor?
Yeah, sure. I think in just a couple of words, to keep doing what they're doing currently and not to stop. It's not because they've done one monitoring or two monitorings, or they've done one copy advice a year, or that they had an interaction with the SRO that's enough. It's an ongoing process, right? That the fostering of trust is a very tedious long-term goal, and it could be very easily lost just because of a mistake, and it could be an innocent mistake, and that happens. And this is where, as Vasiliki mentioned, the collective aspect of self-regulation is where we hold each other to account, and we also support the brands support one another through an independent oversight, if you want. So it's just to keep doing what they're doing, and it will eventually, they'll learn from their mistakes, as every industry has, and to keep doing and not letting go.
Yeah, I agree. We should keep doing what we're doing in terms of self-regulation. Another example can be, for example, EASA is giving us the opportunity to be inspired and see what other industries are doing. So this is also something great. And finally, for EGBA in particular, I would say that this is a great chance for us to be the leading example. And hopefully we can also influence other betting companies to follow the examples of this type of advertising and improve overall, let's say, the content and the message around it.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you. You made moderating this webinar exceptionally easy for me. Thank you for the valuable insights, and thanks for everyone who joined for this really important discussion. So obviously we spoke quite a bit today about best practices and guidelines for online advertising and how we can learn from other sectors and any emerging challenges. So I really appreciate that we discussed these, as I know that it's a huge issue for most operators. And also it was really interesting to learn about EGBA's Responsible Advertising Code and Influencer Pledge framework, as it gives a lot of practical structures as well. We don't have time for questions from the audience, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to contact Vasiliki or Tudor. And just to let you know, a reminder that this webinar, the recording, will be available on safergambling.eu. So obviously feel free to share it with other colleagues who couldn't join us live. And again, thank you to Vasiliki and Tudor and everyone who's watching this part of the European Safer Gambling Week. Obviously, we encourage you to stay involved and join the other sessions taking place throughout this week, as we're trying to aim for a more sustainable gambling environment across Europe. So thank you,
Thank you
and
very
enjoy
much.
the rest of Safer Gambling Week. Thanks.
Cheers, many thanks.